This is my last chance to stand in front of you, so I want to thank again our underwriters, Wired Magazine, Cisco Systems, Microsoft. Microsoft has taken a certain amount of gas here, but they have also done some wonderful things and some wonderful things for this conference. So, and thank you to all who have participated. My job of introducing Bob Metcalfe seems kind of dumb. I mean, Bob is certainly known to this audience, an iconic figure in our newly highly connected world. So I'm not going to tell you what piece of transformational technology Bob invented that affects each and every one of us every single day. And I'm not going to tell you what major American corporation he founded and brought to fruition. But I am going to tell you one thing. When you work with somebody who has done not just a great thing, but continually does great things, you wonder, well, what is the secret? So if the guy has raisin toast for breakfast, you think, well, is that it? Is it raisin toast, perhaps? And I don't know if I know what the secret is, but I'll tell you one thing. In working with Bob over these last 3 years, a point he has made again and again, every time we started to get our spirits down or get on each other's backs, was this is supposed to be fun. And then he would do some wonderful thing that made it fun. And so here's a guy that thinks everything's supposed to be fun. This conference has got his trademark all over it. Bob Metcalfe.
I'm afraid my microphone isn't working. Is it working? It's technology. Now, my job in the next 60 minutes is to summarize this conference, which is as you already realize, is impossible. If you're a speaker, could you raise your hand? Who are the speakers who might still be here? Ooh. Yeah. Yeah. So I want to apologize in advance to the speakers. It's very hard to summarize anyone. Imagine how Tolstoy would feel in the front row if I told him that I had just read War and Peace and it's about Russia. And so I'm not worthy to do this, and I'm especially not worthy at this very minute. I want to warn you, I'm not in a really great mood because one of my heroes got angry at me just a moment ago. Brenda Laurel expressed anger. And I'm struggling not to be angry at her back, and I hope none of it comes out in my summaries. And I'm also hoping to lead a discussion now, if we have time, and please participate during my summary. You know, smile, laugh, clap, hiss, boo, yell out, comment. Don't make any speeches, but just, it's my turn to speak. But at the end, maybe we'll have a discussion, and we can make you can make your speech then. Now, the Camden Conference, this is the third in a row, and it grew out of a previous conference called the Camden Conference, which was not about technology, it was about foreign affairs. I shouldn't use the past tense because it's still ongoing. And we've spun out of that the Camden Technology Conference, and our first one was on the impact of telecommunications on rural communities like the one we live in. And out of that, we saw that education was one of the areas being impacted by telecommunications, so we chose for our second year to have learning, the transformation of learning, be the topic. And it was during that conference that we learned that popular culture, I learned anyway, that popular culture was stealing market share from education proper, and that we better look at that, and which led us to this conference, PopTech, and we were fortunate enough to attract Henry Jenkins and Harvey Ardman to be the program chairs. Now, in beginning my summary, let me tell you the 7 most feared words on the internet. They are, "You just don't get it, do you?" Now that's a very frequent phrase on the internet, and it's the words of intellectual bullies who have run out of arguments to try to persuade you about some insight that they have about the internet that you don't. One of the things I really liked about this conference, especially since it's my premise that no one really gets the internet quite yet, I really liked about this conference that there was very little looking down the nose at people. It was a really refreshing and enjoyable overall, and I wanted to start with that. I'm approaching this summary with considerable humility now, which is a big change for me. Now, the opening speaker, it's hard to summarize since his talk was a summary. That was, of course, MIT professor Henry Jenkins, who is a professor of literature. And he said that his presentation was an example of the new media. He attempted to define pop culture. I guess knowing what Alan Kay would later say about categories, he decided to list the categories of folk culture to be distinguished from high culture, mass culture, pop culture, mainstream culture, niche cultures. And in talking about pop culture, he touched on the what I believe is common. That term is often used in the pejorative as being some sort of pathology. And then he listed some of the moral panics that pop culture put us in, the fear that the old will displace, the old culture will be displaced by the new, the fear that the real will be displaced by the mediated, the fear that the pop culture will transform our identities. And I guess he was anticipating the identity session that certainly transformed. And he then went on to the generational differences, fear of generational differences, and then lastly, fear of loss of intellectual property. Henry was followed by Pat Cadigan, writer, the science fiction writer, who questioned whether pop culture drives values or whether values should drive pop culture. She said, when we reject pop culture, we're basically saying we don't like who we are. She touched on the Kansas fiasco and explained enigmatically the problem there is that she was not in charge of what went on in Kansas. I think, incidentally, the mistake often made in analyzing the Kansas situation is that people focus on the particular issue, evolution, rather than the process that led to governments run that school. Now the
cheap shot.
Your whole talk was a cheap shot. Now getting back, that's just fun. We're just funning. That's just nothing personal. Now and Pat ended what I think sort of the bottom. Oh no, she went on to say that the web is a model of the human mind and that we shouldn't blame content for being there. And then in the end she said, we're going to rise to the occasion. That is the occasion of this technology, of this internet. We're going to rise to the occasion or we are not. She was followed by Governor Angus King, the independent governor with hair. He began by saying he had been put on that stage as revenge. Henry Jenkins' revenge. Henry had been forced to sit before Congress. It was fair to have an elected official before this assembled body. And now I would now like to summarize what the government said about the role of the government in controlling culture. Thank you. He said there was more to be lost than to be gained by governments controlling culture. He touched on the Littleton tragedy, where it has been speculated games or the internet were somehow complicit, and he said real life trumps virtual reality every time. He was hopeful on the internet. He viewed it as a democratization of culture, and I assume he was using democratization as a positive term. And you have to tolerate the junk to get good stuff. And toward the end, under questioning, he said that he was concerned about people who wrap themselves in the First Amendment to justify the junk they produce, and that people should be more responsible in what they produce. And he's also, in a hopeful note, said the mass digital culture that we're discussing creates community, and that's good. And incidentally, we got to talk this guy into running for president against Brenda. That way, no matter who won, we would win. Stuart McBride was the moderator, and I'm sorry we didn't hear more from Stuart. He's the Jesse Ventura of moderators, he said. And he moderated a session on time, memory, and new media, the first speaker of which was Stuart Brand of the Global Business Network. Stuart's talk was to promote the long view, the 10,000-year view, the clock of the long now. He had that beautiful picture of the various speeds of what goes on in the world. At the very base, nature moving very slowly, culture a little more quickly, government a little more quickly, infrastructure a little more quickly, commerce faster than that, and then fashion zipping by here at the top. He taught us a bit about exponentials and the runaway phenomena and Moore's law. He lamented the fact that the fast gets all the attention, whereas the slow has all the power. He touched on our major icons, the Cold War icon of the mushroom cloud, the island Earth icon, and then perhaps the clock, perhaps as an icon for the future, an antidote to the millennium, he said, and talked about his prototype clock, which I believe it's on December 31st, 2001, will bong twice. And hopefully we'll all be around to hear it bong the third time. And he didn't have time to talk about this, but probably the scariest or most interesting thing he said was that infotech is just preparation for biotech. And that in the biotech world, about which he is considerably expert, things get really weird really fast, he said. He was followed by Pedro Mayer, photographer, who told us his life story. Did I remember to pronounce it correctly? Who told us his life story as an outsider, and he's sitting right here listening to what I'm saying about what he said. And he then took us on the journey from digital, of photography, from a time when pictures never lied to now, where who knows. He argued, I think, beautifully for cultural diversity. And at one point he quipped about the arrogance and smugness of American technologists, by which I interpreted moi. But I let it wash over me. He then gave us another beautiful history, this of the piñata, China, Italy, Spain, Mexico, and finally Superman across the Camden Opera House. And then yet another beautiful story about the fox and the dog, and suggesting that what many of us are doing on the internet is screwing dead foxes. And then he closed with a thought which I knew instantly to be true, but had never quite looked at it this way, that life without memory is no life at all. The next panel was led by our leader, Richard Anderson, moderating Soloway and Surf on the subject of pop culture and learning, which brings us to the card entitled Elliot Soloway. I love you, Elliot. Tough love, but... The title of the opening slide and title of Elliot's talk was Public Education, Any Hope? And then he gave us the surprise answer, yes. He said schools need three things: money, alluding to the E-rate, which is very important, according to Professor Soloway; technology, that the schools don't want technology, they want curriculum, and to get technology into schools you need to deal with them by talking about curriculum; and standards, and he talked a little bit about the timing problems of standards and pedagogy. Is that how I say it, Brenda? Pedagogy. Is that derisive enough tone? Pedagogy. Are you hissing pedagogy or my pronunciation of the word? Elliot then reiterated, and it bears repeating, that good education involves inquiry into the authentic questions arising from student experiences. He talked about in the building of digital libraries and this nuance between filtering and censoring versus building digital libraries. He talked about the need for software technology in schools to be productivity tools for kids, especially in the visualization area. And he closed with two poignant points. One, democracy equals public education. And then after a really long, depressing story about the difficulty of dealing with that system and how you can't really fix one part of the system because, like all systems, it has immune reactions and the other parts will gang up on the part you're trying to fix. Did I say that right? And he said the reason why he goes to work every day and confronts this difficult problem is because it's the only battle worth fighting. Thank you, Elliot. We then were delighted to have a returning speaker, another returning speaker, Chris Cerf, who gave us a progress report on Between the Lions, which will launch, I understand, on April 3rd. Is that right? Can't wait to see it. Half-hour daily show for children between 4 and 6, if I noted that correctly. He reminded us that every great project begins with a bad pun, and as you saw, bad puns fuel it for its entire life. He mentioned the importance of teaching context, and the analogy he used was taking children from the desert and attempting right off to teach them how to swim. He talked about the need for education and entertainment to occur at the same time, showmanship, the importance of that. And it was funny, most of his talk was about using technology in education, but not the internet technology. It was the television technology that seems to be the focus. Now, television, we heard the internet's 30 years old. Television is, what, 50 years old? In the late 40s it took off. And we're still not using it right. We still have more iteration to do. The public schools, a lot of kids are watching television, and I interpreted Chris's efforts as an effort to make better use of the time already allocated to television. And he did suggest that TVs can do some things that schools can't do. And I can't wait for the show to premiere. Then Linda Stone took the stage as a moderator, for John Perry Barlow. And I do not think that Linda has drunk, is that right, Art? Yeah, I've always been bad at that. Has drunk the Microsoft Kool-Aid. I don't accept that for a moment. Now, summarizing John Perry Barlow, a cyberspace guru, former lyricist for the Grateful Dead, and a Wyoming cattle rancher. He said it was his goal to eliminate broadcast media, making the point he thinks broadcast media is eliminating itself, and he just wants to get credit for it when it happens. That centralized control is dead, and what we have now is emergent control. But he warned us, of course, that when something dies, and he likened central control to reptiles and being locked in a closet with this reptile known as broadcast media centralized control, that when reptiles die, they thrash around a lot, and a lot of people can get and will get hurt as a result as the central control model dies. He said this is an occasion for the renegotiation of relationships between men and women, North and South, industrial and non-industrialized, institutional, individual, parents and children, a lot of power relationships to be renegotiated. He talked about the force of arms as an influence in society, the force of law, but the one that worries him most is the control of information, and he used Hitler's wielding of the propaganda machine as a prominent example. He said one of the things wrong with our information systems is that they survive, they feed themselves by selling attention to advertisers. And a consequence of that is that what attracts attention, now what's that, the hypothalamus, whatever that thing is. Mathematics, not biology, I'm sorry. You feed the hypothalamus with fear, hunger, sex, and violence, which is a pretty good description of television. And he talked about cyberspace and was quite optimistic, I thought. He believes that on the internet, truth has a larger megaphone than money. And then he introduced the term .communism as what's happening there. Then turned onto the subject of politics. It was quite, and we heard this repeatedly, was quite pessimistic there. The two most important things in politics are money and I forget. And then he observed that he and I thought of the same joke in the same month, which is the joke about Al Gore inventing the internet. And a lot of people, you laugh at that prospect, but I'll have you know, to this very day, the internet runs on many of the original algorithms. He closed by saying two things, one to us and one to Microsoft. To us, he said, it's your job now to be a good ancestor. And to Microsoft, he said, boo. That evening we went to the Owl's Head Transportation Museum, and in case you missed the purpose of that trip, what you saw there were the artifacts of the transportation revolution. And we geniuses who designed all this hoped that you would then see that what we're now doing is introducing the artifacts, we all are introducing the artifacts of the information communications revolution, and that the impacts of transportation on the development of our society are likely to be the same kind, at least of the same magnitude, same order of magnitude as the impacts of the communication revolution that's happening 100 years later. Peter Hirschberg then took up the moderation of a panel on the ownership of digital property, and to John Perry Barlow's comment to Microsoft, which as you may remember was boo, Peter Hirschberg said, boo who? What does that mean? His first speaker was in that session was Virginia Postrel of Reason Magazine. The Future and Its Enemies is her book. A quick summary of her talk: dynamism, open, good. Stacism, closed, bad. The world is open-ended, it's out of control, and technology isn't helping that. It's breaking control. That there is, her point of view is that there is no one best way to do anything. And her worry is that often we will be seduced by the good story. Something that makes a good story. A lot of what happened at this conference was a good story. But the question is, are those good stories authentic? Are they true? Even though they may be appealing. She gave examples. The industrial policy in Japan, referring to the semiconductor industry, didn't work out according to statist analysis. She referred to Bellamy's, I believe Bellamy was 19th century's projection of a 4-channel telephone system providing us all the music that we needed, and contrasted that with the CD Walkman. And then she told us the sad story of Schindler's List and efforts to, even though we clearly realize that Schindler's List has redeeming social value, it's still got a rating of M and would not get through the V-chip as an even if that's not literally true. I'm not sure. It just sort of warns us that we have to be careful about looking for the one best way. The pursuit of happiness. The reason for the First Amendment is for unarticulated preferences. The reason we have a First Amendment is that a lot of us can't explain why what we say is why we want to say it or why it's true, and we don't have to explain it because we got the First Amendment saying we don't have to explain it. And her RX for this, her prescription was that we needed dispersed knowledge and entrepreneurial discovery. She was followed by Rosemary Coombe, an intellectual property lawyer and professor studying the political and cultural ramifications of intellectual property. On the internet, her key message was, I think, the consumers talk back to the mass media. Back to the mass media, back at the corporations, back at the producers of advertising. She used the domain name example to great effect. Domain names on the net have become inadvertently trademarks, and the great disputes that are now rising, or whether they are trademarks or not, and if they are, how they should be treated. She talked about a series of gripe sites, like camconsucks.org is likely to be one of them. Do we own that one? She talked about the inept response of Mattel to some attacks and some even support of the Barbie brand, Life in Plastic. It's fantastic. She told us the Ajax story and Colgate-Palmolive's lame response to that new stimulus on the net. She told us how the cease and desist letter had become a badge of courage in the culture jamming that goes on. Hey, we got the cease and desist letter. To many small companies, the best thing that can happen to you is to get sued because it's great publicity. And then she closed by pulling this all together to show that what's happening, what should be happening, or perhaps is happening, is calling to account the acceptance of responsibility of large corporations. Next, David Liddell. David Liddell was chosen to moderate this panel on pop culture's new billionaires because he works at Interval Research, which is Paul Allen's research center, and he's a billionaire, and we figured that would make him an expert on billionaires. He's an expert on much more. His feeling was that popular culture and technology and commerce are inextricably linked. His optimistic view was that it's a rising tide. He introduced this, I guess not immediately, but subsequently, that in business there's the flow of cash and we take profit as a surrogate for cash or a predictor of cash, and revenue as a predictor of profit, and on the internet, eyeballs as a predictor of revenue someday. And now finally, as we saw in the subsequent talks, the valuing of customer relationships as a predictor of future eyeballs, as a predictor of future revenue, as a predictor of future profits, as a predictor of future cash. A hell of a lot of prediction going on and not a lot of cash flowing, I'll tell you. Now, David Kaplan opened that session. David's from Newsweek, wrote the book Silicon Boys, and he told us a sad story about how he missed out on Yahoo. And believe me, he's not alone. He's not the only person who missed out on Yahoo. And incidentally, if he had done that 100 times, he would have been right 99, probably. Poor guy. He chose to write his book about what goes on in Woodside, California, which he viewed as sort of the epitome of, that's epitome, Harvey, of the epitome of opulence of Silicon Valley. The meek didn't inherit the earth, the geeks did, he said. I should point out that John Scully and I both used to live in Woodside, but we've moved to Maine instead. The big disconnect he found in Silicon Valley was the constant stating that we're not in it for the money. And the evidence in Woodside is that, yeah, we actually are in it for the money. He also said that tycoons underestimate the role of luck in their success and therefore are reluctant to give back enough, I guess, to society. I wouldn't know. He kept leaving the stage. Was he calling his broker as he joked? Does he have a deadline at Newsweek? Does he have some physical ailment that we don't know about? I'll find out and let you know next year. The next speaker was Lou Mazzucchelli. I asked him. Well, in Italian, the double Z, sort of transes over to T, so it's Maccia, and then the CH is K, so it's Mazzucchelli. And this, grazie. And since we're all struggling to be more ethnic than thou, Norwegian, Irish, English person, Lou introduced us to the calculus of internet IPOs, initial public offerings, the first time a stock. To diverge for a moment, there's a really sad thing going on among entrepreneurs about IPOs. I talk to a lot of young entrepreneurs who are my favorite people. Even old ones would be my favorite people. And the sad thing happens, you say, well, tell me about your company. And in the first 5 sentences about their company, the phrase IPO appears. And that is really sad because an IPO is a relatively minor financial event in the history of a company. And I think Lou made this point. He talked about the impossible valuations of internet companies, implying that the bubble would burst very soon, and I suppose there would be fewer billionaires as a result of the bursting of that bubble. He gave us some analysis about how expectations get ahead of reality in waves. You may remember the diagrams. And how pop culture's role in this is to convert, in the consumer markets, wants into needs. He then talked about the movement of technology into pop tech, where the transition has been from that innate desire that we all have to compute things to other needs less important, like entertainment and communication. You should know that I'm a big fan of the bubble bursting phenomenon of internet stocks. In fact, I have predicted, I did back in April and continuously since then, as I often do, that on November 8th, which is not far from now, the internet stock bubble will burst. So I recommend you not be long on internet stocks, particularly those that rely on advertising for their revenues, on November 8th, because they're going into the can. What's that? Well, first of all, it's Monday. November 8th is a Monday. It's the first, it's right after the third quarter results will all be out by then. Fourth quarter expectations of earnings will be posted and internalized. Y2K will be looming. And does any of you have a better day to suggest than November 8th? I expect to get a lot of email on November 9th. The next speaker was John Scully, who we, I hope many of us know anyway, former CEO of Pepsi and Apple, and now a venture catalyst, a marketing man by his own admission. He talks about in this internet commerce market that the power is shifting from producers to consumers. The consumers are now in control. He then categorized, once again anticipating Alan Kay's vicious attack on this whole notion of categorizing. You're still here, Alan, right? Well, he introduced the categories of marketing, much to your delight. Permission marketing, viral marketing, affinity marketing. Is that viral or viral? Viral marketing. Affinity marketing, target marketing, relationship marketing. And he talked about how the net is now going from the curious to the useful to the indispensable. He made another great point about marketing, about advertising. Was it him who said that advertising purpose is to convince you that you lack something? That may have not been him, but thank you. So then I'll say that again when I get to Paul's card. Appointment television is dead. Television on demand is the thing. And then he used People PC, one of his 20-some companies, to give an example of this new economy where the value is, the focus is on the value of the customers rather than the cost of the PCs. This is a company that you can get a free PC from for $24 a month, $25 a month. How the shift is going, so the PC is free, it's everything else which costs money. The key idea behind People PC is the aggregation of buying power. The company derives a lot of revenues from bounties for customer acquisition. This is a phenomenal company. This year, they've already, as John reported, experienced a 50 times step up in valuation between rounds of venture capital. They've raised $8 billion of debt to finance the computers that they're going to give out free. They plan to spend $40 million in ads this year. This is a company that just got founded this year, and he showed us one of the ads, and judging by that ad, I think it's going to be a successful company. And what you get for $24.95 is the free PC, the free internet service, the free support, and free deals on products. And the People PC hopes to have 12 million members in 3 years. Brenda Laurel was then the moderator on the Creative Arts panel. And in opening that panel, she indicated that computers, by that I mean information technology, the internet, computers are being used more and more to tell stories, which is a hopeful sign, and that they are not replacing culture but extending it. And that point was then elaborated on by Janet Murray, professor of literature, communications, and culture, now sadly at Georgia Tech. MIT has lost her to Georgia Tech. And she claims to be a professor of literature of the 19th and 21st centuries. There's something about the 20th century literature, which she called postmodern, and I don't know what that is, but I know she doesn't like it. She talked about the internet bringing more voices, and that a medium, this is to set us at ease, the medium that brings more voices does not devalue the old, and we saw that point made over and over again in the sessions that followed. She's in search of a new language for this new medium, not the only one in search, as we found out a little later. She's looking for a better understanding of the properties and pleasures of this new medium. She convinced me that you really can't appreciate Shakespeare until you've read it in the original Klingon. How do you write a hyper-serial story in the new medium? We don't know. We ought to. We will. And then she ended with the positive note that what she sees happening is that we're taking baby steps in the right direction with this new medium. Then came Paul Godwin, musician, who began by showing us a shruti, a box with which he made beautiful noises. He then told us about the transformative communal experience of theater, in particular the DJ Christ Superstar production of the Spiral Oasis at the Burning Man. He then led us in a cathartic techno growl, which I will not repeat since you've just recently been through it. And he invited us to join him in singing with the machine, in this case the dial tone, which was cool. And he tried to, this was sort of a jujitsu type recommendation. He tried to make it clear to us that there is chaos very much in the box. And I think when he said the box that time, he had shifted from the shruti to the computer. I think chaos is very much in the box, but what we need to do is invite the rooster of chaos to dinner. You really had to be here. And what he sees as the new media is as technically flawed, but it's a new handle. It's not magic, but it requires conscious collaboration, something like the dial tone, to be harmonized with. The next session was moderated by our own Harvey Ardman on personal identity in pop tech. And he kicked that session off by showing us his wallet. And frankly, you know, when he did that, he opened his wallet and dropped all those cards. And boy, that is really theatrical and dramatic. Little did I know what was to follow. Erica Mohammed from the Department of Cinema Studies at NYU gave a talk, and please forgive me, I do not feel adequate to the task of summarizing what she said. She's black, I'm white. She's a woman, I'm a man. She's young, I'm old. She's in cinema, and I'm an engineer. What chance have I to summarize what she said? But my best shot is, she said that DJs are collage artists, post everything. That it is not necessary to give up your humanness to accept machines, although sometimes people do it. That we should not make a fetish of our tools. As an example of that, I think, she told us about what she called techno-orientalism, wherein an artist, whose name I missed, became so preoccupied with the tool, he missed, or she missed the fact that in that production with the Japanese guy with the headset on and the geisha-looking woman, that in fact that expression was stereotyping Japanese males as high-tech enthusiasts and geishas as passive women. And that, I think that was an example of focusing on the medium and not on the content. And then she closed with a statement that I do not understand, but I loved it, which is that you are always implicated. And perhaps someone could explain that to me during the discussion. The next speaker was Sandy Stone, University of Texas professor of new media. She welcomed us to the virtual reality of Camden, Maine. She told us the story of teaching 50 minor birds to stutter. They're still there. The story, she told us, of hearing what a cat hears, Lucy the cat, on the hunt. And then, in making points about the fluidity of identity, not only just in modern society, but especially online, she asked a series of questions about identity. Is it continuous? Is there a continuous me, or am I a series of concatenated identities? I think the second one is the right answer. Do we have a core identity, or are we, as she said, identities all the way down? Incidentally, I used to suffer from schizophrenia, but we're better now. And then, echoing Stuart Brand, Sandy proposed the formation of the Long U Foundation. And she wondered if in 1,000 years we would recognize ourselves, much as my colleague later, would we understand ourselves in 1,000 years? And then what followed is something that I had been warned about, and I was afraid it was going to freak me out. And I can't wait to read about it in the Camden Herald. But I will never again scratch my neck in the same way. And she told us about the trans business, the remapping of body parts, the fluidity, again, the fluidity of identities. And she too is in search of a new language, this new medium, because new medium exceeds our current frame of reference. And although she does begun to piece the language together, and an important part of that is a thing that she called, and I don't know how to pronounce it exactly, enlacement, or enlacement, as I would say, which has to do with touching. And she's quite sure that in this new language, touching will be included. And then she closed with the following wisdom, which is, if you can't theorize, sing it. And she sang a song that I will always remember, Because the Lady is a Trans. The next session, tough act to follow, Alan, but you pulled it off. How civilization can survive pop culture, and as prima facie evidence that it can, Alan gave us the gift of bringing his friend Don Lewis here to perform for us, who answered that question by mixing the old and the new and the black and the white and the technology all together in producing that Beethoven, black gospel, high technology, authentic music that we enjoyed. Don Lewis. I don't know how to summarize that. And he left us with the hopeful refrain, hold on, just a little while longer, everything's gonna be all right. Following that act, Alan the visionary, read Wired magazine, November issue, page 300. Alan said, we're all musicians. Forget all this category nonsense, Henry and John. We're all musicians, and we deal with ideas which are direct and developed. We have to be careful to get our techniques and our ethics aligned, is the word I settled on. I don't think Alan used that word. Techniques and ethics matched. And he raised the example of the knife, where our first mistake is to grab it by the blade. Then we have to wonder what to cut with it. What is it okay to cut with it? And finally, how does it affect us as the cutter? How are we changed by this new tool? Alan said that humans make themselves and that invent themselves, and that inventing is very hard. Alan made the point, and of course he's sitting right there, and I'm sure you will elaborate it if I make a mistake, that science is art. And one of the things, I'm pulling this out of a lot, the universe frequently supplies us with unpleasant evidence that it really doesn't care about us. He makes a distinction again between hard fun and soft fun, and that if you really want to generate a steam, you can't do it with soft fun. It has to be hard fun, fun in which you have to invest yourself. And he seemed worried about politics, and particularly credulity, and the seductiveness of the good story, a point I touched on earlier. And that's a lame summary of a much better talk. And then this morning, moving toward conclusion, we were delighted to meet Noel Paul Stuckey. Well, a lot of you know him. I have to admit, until this morning, Mary was my favorite. He spoke so recently. He talked about the space, he sang a song about the spacesuit with the three parts, the brain, the groin, and the heart, connecting body to body. He was a sysop. He invoked E.E. Cummings, although that's giving sysops more credit than they deserve. He imitated the old American standard. He talked about the virtual party. He brought us another way at looking at the challenge and closed with a song, Love Rules. Our lives are connected. He then introduced the two panelists who had a tough act to follow. J.C. Hers, the video game baby, it says in her resume, writer of Joystick Nation, told us that girls just want to have fun. Something in us, even more fundamental than the desire to compute, is the desire to play. Play is learning, and she gave us some categories, sorry Alan, some categories of learning: military, target practice, games of chance, logic, racing, collecting, and so on. Persuaded us, I think, to begin to think of cyberspace as doll space. She alluded to the, you said I didn't have all night to think about this, so I'm sorry, it's a little rough here. She introduced us to dodgeball. And I played a lot of dodgeball, and we used to know, you know, they come in close to the line, you can really nail them, put that welt on their face. To me, the strongest thing that she said, I've always believed this, I think, for myself, but I was delighted to hear her say it again, is that fear of failure is the problem, and that the future is a game design, and if you want to win, you have to play, she closed with. And I'm still looking for the dad button on some of the toys my kids have. Mike Hawley, how do you summarize Mike Hawley? I should have brought a tennis racket with me today. And then I would have shown you my topspin backhand, which many of you would realize was a mere imitation of Rod Laver's backhand. But the reason you wouldn't recognize it immediately is that I have transcribed his backhand, because Rod Laver is left-handed, and I am right-handed. And the other reason you wouldn't have recognized my backhand is that I have, on top of the Rod Laver transcription, I have layered a bit of Venus Williams athleticism. Mike chose his favorite tool, which is the piano, and what was really nice about that is he talked about musical greats who seem almost timeless, and they're not timeless. They existed in time, and in fact, some of them pretty recently, and how, like the piano recital, which I've always taken to be interminable, is actually a recent invention. And so he talked about the music greats like maybe we talk about the characters in cyberspace, you know, a delightful way of talking about them as human beings. Liszt as a womanizer, for example, 150 years ago. I didn't know that. Technology, he quoted, I think it was Negroponte who said, technology is a gift that we give the next generation. And I took the entire content of Mike's performance to be a bright one, which is we have little, those of us who want to defend the old culture against the new have little to fear. Either we're overestimating the timelessness and the fundamentalness of the culture we take to be eternal, which was only invented 100 years ago, which in the long now isn't very long ago, or the culture we have is not very good and could use some replacing. And that's a crude summary of Hawley. Next came Henry Jenkins again as moderator of the Digital Age Teens, where we heard from Christopher Ireland and Brenda Laurel. And Henry began, although he was sitting there at the time, by saying that someone told him not to express his opinions. And then, you know, the thing I resented about that comment, Henry, is you implied that shearing sheep is a punishment. And then another thing I witnessed in this panel, and now I'm getting to the part that really drove me crazy, culminating in Laurel's outburst, was people who flatter themselves that people are trying to censor them. We had a technical glitch on the screen, and the next thing you know, censorship is being alleged. Christopher Ireland, who does, from Cheskin Research, who does market research, and particularly on teenagers, who represent a $140 billion market. Of course, it's crass to refer to them that way, since each and every one of them is an individual, precious, about which any categories or any generalizations are completely hopeless. Maybe. And she described the explorers, the visibles, the status quos, the non-teens, and the isolators, and all the time she's describing them, I'm thinking, what was I? What do I want my kids to be? Which is the best way to be of those 5 ways? She told me to be cool, I have to wear a dress. If only she had spoken yesterday. Then she made 3 points about what's going on with teenagers, or generalizations of which there are many exceptions. That the internet is heavily used by teenagers, that they find it somewhat more interesting than a mall, but less interesting than a car. Second, that ethnicity is cool in this post-melting pot era. And third, that gender roles are fluid, a point that had been made amply earlier in the program. And finally was Brenda Laurel's talk. Now, Brenda is, I love Brenda Laurel. And in essence, her talk, which you just heard, so it'd be foolish of me to summarize very much, but she wanted to she was taking Christopher's results and applying what she called active love, and distinguished the soft liberals from the hard capitalists, and expressed what I took to be authentic anger at the hard capitalist. And if I had to choose, I would say I was a hard capitalist, so that's why I am tempted to take offense at her anger. I love you, Brenda. Let me just say, the only contradiction that I heard in your presentation, or the part I had, and I'm sure you can explain it, and I won't find it to be a contradiction anymore, is that you expressed anger at the unconscionable thing going on in our schools. The teachers, for example, despite their strong unions, have horrible compensation plans. And now, now considering that the schools have been in the hands of soft liberals for as long as I can remember, and that they are run by liberals, I don't understand why you're angry at me, Brenda. Would anyone else like to make a comment at this time? We have 7 minutes to play with here. Any questions or comments before I thank you and close?
Very good.
Microphone number 2.
Hi.
I don't know how I got here. I'm really glad I came. Had a wonderful, wonderful time. I want to know, can you actively try to get more people like me here?
Get right on that. Well, we should. And based on the friendly nature of your comments, many more people like you would be welcome. Thank you for making that comment. Another comment or question? We have some more time. 4.
Program at MIT that Brenda Laurel might want to relay on news of. It's a crisis, it's a global government crisis simulation for 7th to 12th graders that an old friend of mine named Yael Zussman has been running on and off for probably 15 years. He once wanted to be president, but he decided that what he should be doing is running these crisis simulations. And in the old days, 100 to 120 students would come from around the Cambridge and Boston area, and we would set them up with something like an ancient VAX and 100 VT-100s in different parts of campus, and each student would take on the role of a minister of some function from their country. And this would be a great model to deploy on a net as long as it's working. And maybe someone can take that idea and run with it. His name is Yael Zussman, and I'm not sure what his current email address is, but for information, you could look up the Educational Studies program on the MIT homepage, and I can vouch for that. It helped me drop out of several schools starting in 1962 when I started hanging around MIT. And I'm sorry in some respects that I've moved back up here to Camden and Rockport because my 4 children miss their easy opportunity to participate in those sorts of programs now. And I hope that Camden, with all of its collective fiscal energy and good intentions, sometimes clouded by marketing angles, will perhaps be a school that will pick up on this sort of simulation and get kids talking with each other all around the world and skip the local politicians altogether. One other comment I'd like to make is that I think, contrary to what Harvey wrote in the paper 3 weeks ago, I think this is a trade show. I think that people are here to trade and barter their intellectual property with one another. I think that could have been made a little more clearly, and terminology could have been adjusted.
Well, the word trade show doesn't mean that, but you can redefine it if you'd like.
Well, from where I come from, it certainly does. And I've been doing trade shows since I was in junior high school.
Well, this bears no relationship to Comdex, and I think that was the distinction Harvey was making.
Okay. And the only other thing I was hoping that Mike would discuss
what's the hissing about?
Or make a comment, Mike Hawley, would be about the probability of finding someone to make networkable digital pianos affordable so that schools can connect their students up with people from all around the world and trade music files.
Thank you. Number 2?
Yes, I'm an educator, and I just wanted to say first that I was here last year, and of course the topic was education, and I wondered if you could top the show this year. I think you really did. It's just amazing. I'm so glad I came here. What I would... I've been a technology hobbyist ever since I got my Atari game machine and then the Atari computer. And now what I'm about is I'm a doctoral student at the University of Delaware in educational technology and leadership. And I direct one of the training centers in New Jersey for teacher training and technology. And I'm frustrated. I always love to hear Elliot talk. One of the things he said, though, he was talking about charter schools as the wrong answer. Now, I don't mean to be rough on him about that, but I think maybe charter schools in different areas mean different things. Where I'm in New Jersey, we do have a very strong teachers union for the plus and for the minus sometimes. And in New Jersey, a charter school is a place where you can kind of break the rules and do some things different to make things happen. Some of the examples are in Trenton, they've developed a boarding school for underprivileged minority students. They can live there, get a lot of the support that they need, and you know, possibly break the cycle of their problem, social and economic problems. And there's also another school, Charter Tech, that's dedicated to the arts, and it has a very open type of curriculum, and they're training kids to be media savvy and be producers. A teacher that's done a lot of work for MTV and different people, and I just think it's so exciting. The thing that frustrates me is that there's all these great things that we talked about last year and everything, but we're like hampered by the past. One of the books we read in school was Cosmopolis by Stephen Toulmin, and he came up with a German term, I won't even try to remember it, where he talks about horizons of expectation, where we're moving into the next millennium, and yet everything that we do with technology and schooling, we're doing it like we're still in the 18th century or further back, and we go from Gutenberg and forward. And you look at the way schools are run, it's like a factory model, you know, top-down management. The principal, instead of being a supportive person, or maybe not in all cases, but maybe a master teacher that helps others, you have this whole system that's based on tests. And in New Jersey and Delaware recently, the big headlines is kids are failing the tests. So the teacher in the classroom, forget about what you're trying to do creative, we got to teach for the test. The question is, how do we break down the walls of this system that tries to train kids like manufacturing products? And when you fail a test, instead of trying to help the person, you move on and leave them behind.
Well, let me interrupt you now because
Sure. I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry, please. Don't be sorry, but it says session over, and I, you know, being a hard capitalist, I like to end on time. Thank you for your comments, and you've raised huge questions, which, you know, I have the answers right here on my card, but let me wrap up now. I want to thank you all for coming and participating in this conference. I'd like to thank the speakers for giving us their time and ideas, especially Henry Jenkins for coming from way south of Kittery. I'd like to thank our underwriters who let bygones be bygones. Cisco, Microsoft, and Wired Magazine, that's page 300, November issue. I'd like to thank the Camden Technology Conference team, Rich Anderson, Rick Rector, Tom DeMarco, Harvey Ardman, and the rest of us. I'd like to thank the sponsors, the benefactors, the donors, and friends. That's on page 14 of your program. I'd like to call your attention to the yellow piece of paper that you have. Do you all have that evaluation form? Is it green? It's chartreuse, as far as I can tell. And if you would, sort of like 2/3 the way down, you'll find my name in a little box. Could you put a 5 in there? And then turn the forms in. Now, next year, as Tom already mentioned, on October 20th, Friday, 21st, Saturday, 22nd, Sunday, we're likely to have, although we haven't had the meeting and passed the motion, we're likely to have another Camden Technology Conference. Now, I'm pushing that the subject next year be a retrospective on the Y2K problem, especially in enterprise application software. But Harvey and Henry think we should do pop tech again. Was there a preference, a detectable preference there?
Scaffolding hard fun.
Can you read the titles of the 17 suggested other themes which were collected from last year's respondents to the note that went out
I don't have them.
in March? Would Rick Rector make that available someday
Yes, it will appear shortly at www.camcon.org and simultaneously on www.camconsucks.org. And I take the point to mean that when we ask questions, we ought to do something with the answers, and posting those 17 suggestions. Did I understand your question correctly?
Yes.
Yes. Is there anything else that needs to be said at this time, or shall we close? Thank you so much. Thank you.